Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Inspired Classroom's office hours. This is a monthly program we do with our educator colleagues around the country to just get a taste of what's going on in education out there, to bring some ideas to all of us in the education community, develop that community of practice that helps us all do what's best for kids in the classroom. And so today, Inspired Classroom, I'm Kathleen Dent, by the way, the CEO of Inspired Classroom. And today, we are very honored to have with us the newly announced 2022 Montana Educator of the Year. And he is a person who has worked with Inspired Classroom for probably 4 or 5 years, and we've learned so much and enjoyed so much our collaboration. But today we have with us Bill Stockton, who is a high school science teacher in Arlee, Montana. And I am going to just let Bill give us a little sketch of who he is, what he's doing, and what his classroom and situation in teaching is like before we get into our topics. Hi, Bill. Good to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me. So as Kathleen said, I teach in Arlee, Montana, which is on the Flathead Indian Reservation. And it's a very rural school with, we have about 1.5 science teachers. So with that means that I'm teaching all sorts of different topics throughout the day, from biology, AP biology, chemistry, physics, anatomy and physiology. It's kind of a whole gamut of those sciences. And one of the things that gets me really excited, I guess, about teaching science is connecting our students to their community. And so that's one of the reasons why I've worked so closely with Inspired Classroom, because they're huge advocates for using local data and information to bring those scientists into into students' classrooms. And that's something that I've really appreciated about this relationship. But I've been teaching in Arlee this is my 11th school year there. And prior to that, my experience was teaching middle school. And in the middle school setting, I taught pretty much every subject that wasn't science related, which was very interesting. And it was actually a great opportunity for me to really hone my skills as a teacher that could build strong relationships with students and not let the content do all of the leadway or have the content be the 100% focus. Because I found when I was teaching subjects that I wasn't an expert in per se, I really relied on building strong relationships to get my students to engage in that learning process with me, more so than when you're a super master in your content and you just let that kind of lead your classroom. So for me, starting out in that middle school setting was very valuable time. And so I've been teaching in Montana for 14 years now. Prior to that, I was a camp counselor. So I guess I've been in the education world my entire adult life, and I've been in the public school system for the last 30 years. I mean, so I think with that said, I think what public schools are doing is pretty amazing. And I'm excited to represent the state of Montana this year. I'm excited to represent our rural communities, and I'm excited to represent the Flathead Reservation and all of the amazing things that the tribe's doing there within the reservation for their students and for their community, and how important that is for us to recognize as a state. So I'm excited in lots of ways to get to advocate for all of those groups. And so this is just one opportunity, I guess, I have to share some of those great things that we're doing. And I'm very thankful that Kathleen has invited me to do this.
Great. Well, thanks, Bill. You are a busy person, I know, and you also have two little ones of your own, 2 kiddos of your own too. So yeah, I'm sure there's not a lot of time in your day left after that. And I really love, and in working with you, I've learned this too, that importance of, and we know this as educators, that if you don't have a relationship with students, if you just walk in and start hammering content, and most of us love the content we're teaching, and that's gets us excited. But if you don't have that rapport and that culture of respect and rapport and relationship, the students are not going to get on board with you and start to even open their minds to the content, because the content is certainly a lot of times, particularly in science, like you're doing, overwhelming. It's new. And you have such a range, I would guess, of abilities of learners in your classroom too. And I also think the word relationships thrown around kind of loosely. And so how do you define relationship? What does that mean to you? And how do you go about starting to build that?
Yeah, I agree. I think we often throw that word around and there's not a lot of discussion about what we're referring to. And so when I'm thinking about building a relationship from a teacher to a student, we're talking about that professional working relationship in which the student looks at you like a mentor, someone that they can confide in when they're having difficulties, and when they are faced with adversity, they know that they can come to you and talk to you about those challenges. I think that it's a relationship that of respect, where that student sees you as the leader in the classroom, but and knows that you have their best interests at hand at all times. And I think that's the key. We oftentimes will want to build more of a friendship, and that's not the type of relationship we're really referring to. We're referring to that one of mentorship, where we want that student to feel like that you have their best interest. And then with that, there are some different strategies that teachers can use to really develop those. So I took a course about student motivation, and it was done. So the tribal education department of the Flathead Reservation, so the Confederated Salish and Cootie tribes, their ed department offered a professional development to all of the reservation teachers a couple years ago that was done by Dave Stewart Jr. And Dave Stewart Jr. has some great content out on the web about student motivation. And so when I was taking the course, I really started thinking that though it was titled student motivation, what it really was about was how to build relationships with your students to get them motivated in your classroom. And so I really took what he was saying to heart, and I really enjoyed some of his strategies. So with that, he kind of broke student motivation and what I'm calling that relationship piece into kind of 5 categories. The first one being credibility. So one of the best things we can do as educators, if we want to build strong relationships, is show our students that we're a credible source. So that means when we make mistakes, we own up to those mistakes, right? We come into the classroom as a professional, so we want to, show them that professionalism. And so I think that's one step, is that credibility piece and that acting like a professional. Yeah. And within that professionalism, we're looking at things like that competency, like when I make a mistake, I own it, but also when I'm faced with some questions about my content, I need to know my content. And I think most educators, like you said, are very proud of their content knowledge. So most of us don't have a lot of issues with that competency. But when we flip that on our side and act like we know everything, in reality, we don't, we're giving our students some misinformation. So owning our mistakes, letting our students see us make those mistakes and show us that, I think that lends a lot towards our credibility with students. Also showing that we care. And so this is that piece that if you really want to build a strong mentorship, you have to know more about your students than what they're doing in your classroom. So that comes from a lot of discussions. It comes from individual discussions, really looking closely at what they're writing and saying and doing in their body language, and then having conversations with them in private about some of that information to kind of get an idea of where they're coming from and what's going on in their life. And when you try to make that extra connection, you show up at those basketball games, you talk to them about what they're doing on the weekends that have nothing to do with your content, that also lends into that credibility, because they see you as someone that cares about them, that's acting like a professional, that's competent in those areas. So I think that pillar is key in building these strong relationships. And so that was the kind of the first thing that I learned when I was doing that course, that first piece. And I'd already been practicing a lot of those things. Sure. And I just hadn't really put a name to it. And I think the reason we do those things is to build that sense of credibility, so our students can trust us and know that we're good at our jobs. The next piece he went into is for students to feel that motivation and that need to bond with you is a sense of belonging. And for me, what this really is about is showing that all of our students in our classroom fit in our classroom, that every individual student has an advocate in me, that I'm there for each one of them. And I think one way we can do that as educators is making sure that our curriculum that we're choosing to teach encompasses all of the cultures that we are around, and also cultures that we might not be familiar with.
Yeah.
multicultural education is such an important topic. And I think the reason for that is it shows students that they belong in your classroom and they feel validated. And when they go home, there isn't this huge disconnect from what they're seeing at home and what we're learning in our classroom. And so being on a reservation, obviously I spend a lot of time talking about the reservation that I'm teaching on, but also other Native American tribes. And in Montana, where we have 12% of our population is Native American, and it's part of our state constitution, this is a must anyways. But I think if we're branching outside of Montana, we should be talking about all the cultures that are in our schools and really focusing on that. And that sense of belonging is key in building that relationship between teacher and student.
So Bill, I want to pause you just for a second on that point, because for our audience who may not be in Montana or who may not know you or your situation, you are not Native American, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I am not Native American. I grew up in central Idaho, and I have always, so I had very little knowledge other than a lot of misconceptions about Native Americans, and where I was taught those and how I was taught those, I'm not really sure. But I know that when I came to the University of Montana and got into the teacher's education program, one of the courses that we were required to take was Native American Studies as part of that mandate by the government. And then when I started working on the reservation, I started to quickly see that a lot of those misconceptions weren't true, and that we had this false dialogue that had been created by people, and we needed to erase that false dialogue. And so one of the things, like I said, is if we want to do that, we need to educate people across the state about all the amazing things that's going on, and the fact that each tribe is this sovereign nation that's an individual entity, right, that is made up sometimes of multiple tribes with multiple different cultures, and really spreading that message. And I think for me, I'm still not an expert by any means, but I'm really trying to learn from those that are experts. And I've done a lot of work with OPI in Montana on ways to integrate what the state of Montana calls Indian Education for All into my science curriculum, and to help other teachers do that. But it's really about creating a dialogue with those individuals. And so with that belonging, you got to build a sense of community. So we've got our school community, but if we really want these relationships to work, we've got to look at the community around our schools and all stakeholders. So not just our students in our classroom, but their parents or their grandparents or other people in that community. And I think that's where a lot of teachers struggle, is doing that outreach, and it's hard to do. And so I think that making those extra phone calls, right, trying to be seen in the community can help in some of those ways. And bringing those people into your classroom also shows your students that sense of belonging as well, because they see their elders or they see people from their community and the great things they're doing, and how you're validating those great things by bringing them into your classroom to share their knowledge.
I think that's a key point. And I think all teachers across the country are struggling with, diversity and how to teach appropriately and still value all cultures, and and I think sometimes, I know I had 8 different languages spoken in my classroom at one point, and I first started just walking on eggshells because I was afraid to say things, or do something that might be offensive. But the more I just learned about them and had the students teach me, I bet you've learned as much from students as anybody. And then, we just kind of all became that community. And if we made a mistake, we had, like you said, admitted it, and stuff. But I think these are difficult waters sometimes for people. So thank you for that explanation and those examples. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, I think that, and that goes back to what I said before about credibility.
Yeah.
I have had to ask my students a lot of questions, and I'm coming from a place of caring. And so when they see that I'm caring and I'm asking these questions, if it's something culturally that they're not allowed to share or don't feel comfortable sharing, they don't share it with me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of conversations I've had with my students where they've taught me a lot about their culture. And again, even though I'm on a reservation that's ran by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, I have students from lots of different reservations, lots of different cultural backgrounds. And so I've learned a lot about my individual students' cultures by having those conversations. And so that belonging and credibility really go together when it's done correctly. And so that's one great way to build those strong relationships in your classroom. But the third area that he was leaning towards for student motivation in Dave Stewart's course was effort. And so to me, it's showing our students that when they're applying effort, like all good things take a lot of work. It's hard work. And so when they're applying that effort, giving them feedback that can show them the progress they're making. So they might not be at the standard that you want them to be at, but if you're really focusing on that growth and showing them when they apply effort, you're seeing their growth and you're validating that growth for them, that builds a strong sense of community as well in your classroom, because they see you as someone that's validating that hard work. And it might not be where you need it to be yet, but they at least feel that little bit of a bump from you. And that in itself can be huge for a lot of our students, especially ones that are coming out of this pandemic that might be now well below grade level. And we're trying to get them caught up. If we only focus on them hitting those benchmarks and those standards that are set by grade level, we're going to have a lot of failures in that regard. So what we need to do is focus on growth, and that growth of, are you applying effort? Are we seeing growth towards these standards? And I think that in itself is again, it's going to build that relationship, because they're seeing you validating the work that they are putting in. And if we've already shown to be credible, we've already given them a sense of belonging in our classroom, they're a lot more likely to put forth efforts to grow towards that. So I think that's been really important now more than ever, is to look at the growth mindset and that value of showing gains versus necessarily always being a benchmark. And I think it's really important in those lower elementary grades where you might have had a student that they started kindergarten during the pandemic, so they've never really been in school, and now they're a second grader, right? Or you've got a junior in high school who's never really been a high school student in a traditional sense because they've been remote the whole time. So how do we validate the work that they are putting forth and try to build on those skills? And in return, by doing so, you're strengthening again that relationship that you have with that student. The next one that he focused on was efficacy, and really having positive role models in your classroom, as we've already mentioned, and showing that students, we can get them to those desired results with mastery. And so one of the things that I've done is kind of switched my assessment strategy to more standards-based gradings and looking at those exact benchmarks and standards we need to get to. And that has been a really strong tool for our students that I teach. We go from this mindset of, if you're going to prove that you can do this desired outcome for me in a science test, and all I'm doing is giving you multiple choice tests and questions, it's really hard to prove that you know how to do the science or the things that we need to be able to do. And so if we want these desired outcomes from our students, modeling that in an appropriate way, so having assessments that match what we're doing in our classroom and what we're asking our students to do is key. Having other people from the community come in and explain why what we're doing is so validating and important, right? Why that in itself, all those things really build that. Again, it's that building that community around the student. And finally, the last piece he had was value. And so showing individual students, and usually through conversation, that they need some form of intrinsic value that they're getting from the class. Like, what is it internally that you're going to get from the stuff that we're teaching? Oftentimes teachers hear kids, when am I ever going to use this? And the idea isn't, I don't need kids to remember the parts of a cell. You know, what I need them to do is be able to critically think about roots of words and vocabulary, because those reading skills are skills that you're going to use no matter where you go, or lots of different examples. But it's trying to show them that there's value in the things that you're doing, and that oftentimes there's also extrinsic value, that when we educate our communities, we can pay it forward and create this cycle of reciprocity, and we can give it back to our community, and then that can help perpetuate that learning environment as a school culture. So for me, those are kind of the main things that I focus on when I'm thinking about building relationships and what that looks like. Again, Dave Stewart Jr. has got a lot of great material out there, and I'm very thankful for listening to that professional development that he did. And it really brought to light a lot of the things that most of us are doing and just haven't put words to, you know, and that to me was very valuable for my career and thinking about why it's so important. And after the pandemic, more so with what we're seeing as far as some of those isolation behaviors and things like that. And now students not feeling like they belonged, and now we need to show them that they do belong because they've been in and out of their isolations and things like that. So I think it's really key right now in education.
Do you have a quick anecdotal story that you can share about maybe one of your students or a couple of your students that, because, you know, I've heard this from all over the country about, number one, teachers being exhausted by by the pandemic, and then the fear of kids coming back in and being so far behind, and then that social, you know, relationship. And that I even felt it the other day. I was with a group of people and felt like, oh my goodness, I'm in with this whole group and I'm exhausted because I'm not used to being with people, you know?
Mhm.
And so do you have something in particular that you've done this year, or a story about a student that would be a good example of some of the things you've talked about so far?
Yeah, so I think just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, we definitely noticed a sense of change in behavior with a lot of our students, and we're seeing higher levels of anxiety in our high school students, which is all understandable behaviors. There's a lot of uncertainty with day-to-day routines. There's a lot of uncertainty in our individual homes. We know that the pandemic has disproportionately affected families of low income. And so we're seeing that kind of manifest in student behaviors. So what we're trying to do, one of the things we're trying to do is, well, we started a program called, well, it's not new, but we started doing silent sustained reading in our school, which has been interesting. Asking high school students to take a mental health break essentially and read for a little bit of time. And one of the focuses that we had with doing this year was we wanted to give them a time where they could choose anything they wanted to read. They couldn't be on their phones and they couldn't be on a computer, mostly just to kind of get them out of that social realm. And the reason that I've seen success with it really in my classroom, when I talk to my students about it, is they look at it like a time to kind of turn their brain off for a second, because they were feeling that social anxiety from being around all these people all at once again. And when you're constantly on a cell phone or on a computer, like we've been the last 2 years doing education, and then, you know, there's just a lot to it. So we're seeing a lot of success there with giving them that opportunity. I'm very fortunate that we also have a mental health specialist in our school. And I think it's something that schools nationally really need to focus on. And as a society, we need to prioritize having that expert in our school and being able to do group discussions about anxiety and the role it plays in our everyday life, and how to overcome some of those initial fears that we're feeling, and those things has been invaluable to our school. So I would strongly encourage people, if they don't have access to one in their school, reach out to ones that specialize in pediatric psychiatry and kind of that mind frame, because I just think it's important, or counseling, mental health counseling. So that's been very successful. We're still seeing some of those gaps, obviously. And so one of the things too that I've done, as I mentioned earlier, is really focus on growth. And so I'm a lot more flexible with some of my assessments, as far as we're looking for growth from when we took the pre-assessment to the post-assessment type work. And also, when students might not have been as successful as they wanted, having them revisit some material and coming back and retaking assessments. I think that's been a big change that I've seen when I switched to standards-based grading. What I really care about is, can they do these standards? And so when I have a student that's completed all the work that I've asked them to do, and they've maybe struggled through some of it and they didn't score great on their assessment, I can give them some tips on how to go back and look through some stuff, and how to do some different critical thinking activities that might kind of focus on that standard, and then let them retake the assessment. And when you're showing them that you care about the growth mindset, and not, oh, you took your test and failed, it's over, you know, we're moving on, it definitely helps. And so coming out of the pandemic, we knew that we were going to see some of those gaps widen. And so we wanted to try to help all students, but really focus on catching some of those students up. And so using that growth mindset has really been helpful. And, you know, and we know that, as I mentioned earlier, the pandemic really had a negative impact on certain families more so than others. And so we really want to focus on culturally how we can, instead of widening this gap that we've already seen based on our socioeconomic status and based on our ethnicity and all these things, we need to figure out ways to fix that. And I think growth mindset is one of them.
Right. Yes, I think that's great. Well, moving from building relationships with students. Now let's talk about the profession has taken a beating. I mean, I have been so amazed at the people that I've talked with, the creativity of teachers to and the dedication through last year, particularly when they were thrown into online education. All of a sudden, we talked to one teacher who had built a tower out of like soup cans so that she could put a camera somewhere and then an iPad somewhere else. And she sent us a picture of her kitchen table, and it was hilarious. And her dog was sitting there. Teaching is amazing. It's very exciting, and I know you have such a passion for it. But it's also very difficult even on a good day. And then this last year and a half's been not the good day. So how do you see teachers responding right now, and how are you building support for them in the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think first off, what we saw in the last 2 years was absolutely amazing, and it showed how great our educators in this country are and worldwide. I mean, we were put into a situation that overnight we had to change the way that we were taught to do things, and most educators responded right away. Now, not only were we forced to change the way we've done everything, we also had all that extra stress of a global pandemic and now taking care of our family in a different setting. So I want to start by just saying educators are amazing, and we proved that we were very flexible and can do amazing things in short notice. So I think that needs to be stated first. As far as building relationships with other staff and how do we promote educators' well-being and getting new people into our profession, because I think that's going to be really important too. There's been some interesting studies recently that came out that maybe our teacher retention is higher than we thought nationally, which I think is interesting. I was reading some different studies that were done by Ed Reddy and a few different organizations, the RAND Institute. And so those were interesting because there's been a lot of talk about teacher decline in numbers. Now, what we are seeing though is that retention might be in certain communities and in our rural schools and in maybe some of our lower socioeconomic schools, we are seeing teachers leaving the profession, or there's not the financial means to support the extra work that those teachers are doing. Right. So I think one thing that we can do is make sure that we're out there talking about how great educators are is one way to build up this profession, and showing that we are professionals just like a doctor, just like a nurse, just like all of those other individuals are. I think that there's been a double-edged sword with the recession as far as education. At the beginning, a lot of educators were feeling that support and that love coming in from the communities. And as the pandemic waned on and people were getting a little more fidgety at home and ready to get back to their lives, they started looking at teachers holding them up from being able to do that and wanting them to get back to work, not realizing that those words were hurtful to our profession and caused a lot of strife. So I think one thing is to really show that this is a practice, just like those other careers, that we are constantly getting educated in new ways and new techniques and trying to do new things to be better, including going entirely remote when we've never done it before. So I think that's one thing that we just need, that common voice amongst teachers, that when you're out in public and people are asking you about a job, talk about how great teachers are, talk about all the great things that we are doing, and really promote that professionalism so that we start to get looked at the same vein as all those other careers, which I think is super important. In our school, we've really focused on trying to allow staff to have time to work a little more collaboratively together. And what we're finding is teachers want to work with other teachers. And when we were isolated the last year and a half, we're even more so wanting to work with those teachers. So that's been a great change. And where that came from was the administration. So as a teacher, you can always advocate to your administrator, say, hey, we would really like some opportunity to collaborate more. And they might tell you no, but I think most of the time they'd be willing to find time for you to meet in groups and do those things. So that has really created kind of a more cohesive staff at our school. And I'm seeing other groups trying things in other schools. One of the issues we run into though is these very small schools is the isolation you feel when you're the only science teacher, the only English teacher, the only history teacher. You might be the only teacher, as a lot of our schools are in Montana, or one teacher's classes. And so in those cases, what we really need to focus on is setting up some form of mentorship program, whether that's on the state levels, the national level, whatever it is, where we have teachers that are reaching out to each other and giving each other feedback on the work they're doing, validating those things that we're doing, but also giving those teachers somewhere that they can kind of let out some of their frustrations to other people that understand. We all know that it's healthy to have those discussions and those conversations, and we all need to vent at times, but we haven't had those opportunities. And if we want to maintain and build strong relationships with our students, we have to have good mental health ourselves. And that starts with taking care of our own needs. So I think creating some sort of mentorship program for teachers in your school district or with a neighboring school district or through your state or whatever that looks like, I think that could be vital to seeing success in education and continuing it on a long-term scale.
Mhm.
And with teacher, which would help with teacher retention, obviously, because once we feel like we're doing things successfully and we feel validated in our work and we're getting the feedback from our students and now from other teachers, we don't want to leave. It's a great career.
Right.
So we just need to build those things up. The next piece I would think is how do we get new people to want to be teachers? And so I think high schools, a lot of them have really started doing the CTE push and really focusing on health careers and technical jobs and all of those things, which are amazing. We also have the opportunity to add some pre-education courses. You know, a lot of schools are offering the ability to go down and help with the kindergartners, and we could treat that more like a job shadowing opportunity. And there could be some more requirements for those teachers, which I think then shows high school students, hey, this is a great career and I can go in and make a difference. And then also setting up relationships with our university systems where they're putting those teachers into, when they do their student teaching, they're getting a mentor teacher, but there's not always a dialogue of what is expected and what that should look like and how we can promote longevity, and then setting up something for those first, second, third year teachers after they leave your program. You were just at the university where you were kind of with people the whole time. Now you're on your own in the middle of nowhere. You need some sort of support system. So I think the need is there, and having some systems in place could help with those teacher to teacher relationships, and promote our careers and our profession and in a positive way with communities.
I really love those ideas, and especially like you say, for those small schools, rural schools, which we work with a lot too. And I think there are some silver linings that have come out of the pandemic, and the ones that we are seeing is, prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of hesitancy about using video conferencing and technology and all of that stuff. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's just too hard. It's too weird. I don't want to be online, And I think when everybody was forced to, we're kind of exhausted by Zoom, yes, but I think there are some really good things that came out of it, and maybe that connectedness, particularly in small and rural schools, and taking what we've learned and taking, now it looks like there's going to be more effort to get broadband to those communities and all of that. Maybe the time is ripe now to start to build collegial collaboration in areas where they haven't been able to even think about doing that. So it's kind of exciting to me to think about that. And I know you and Arlie is a small school and it's not super isolated, but that being said, it's still in a rural, community. And I know that finding those connections are so important, whether it's within the school or in that. I know the tribal schools do a lot with, having days together to have professional development and that kind of thing. But other folks may not be as fortunate or have such a formalized system to get together and help each other out.
Yeah, I think the key is being willing to reach out for help. When you're in those when you feel isolated and you don't feel like maybe you can talk to another teacher in your building or your administrator, there's other people in this state and in other states and other schools that are willing to help. And I think that's one of the challenges. The other challenge we do face with mentorship programs is there has to be some form of funding for them, because what we don't want is to create it so it seems like one extra task. So teachers are feeling overwhelmed already. We don't want to be like, hey, now you have to meet at all these times with these people. we want it to feel valuable. And I
Right.
think most teachers know the value of good professional development and good mentorship programs, but there still needs to be some sort of financial compensation
Right.
for that time that's lost. So if a school is willing to do it during their contractual hours, that's fantastic. But we know that right now with the shortage of subs, that might not be the case. And so we would have to look at ways to compensate those
Right.
individuals for that extra work. But I also think it's important that, and teachers are doing this anyways, but teachers are constant learners, and so that they are throwing themselves out into these professional development opportunities on their own. I think that's invaluable, and it's one way of many that you become a better teacher in the long run. So, but I think there needs to be a dialogue about, we've got some of this extra COVID relief fund money. What can states do? What can districts do to help promote those mentorship programs and help those individuals out?
That's brilliant. Well, I mean, this whole time has been so full of ideas that I'm just like, this is how we are when we get together. I know between Allie, you and I, hours-long conversations about, oh, and we could do this, and this would be great, and we need to do that. And but that's exactly the example that you're saying, is that you need to continue to get together with people and talk, and that's where you really have that catalyst for change, and change for the better. So that's so exciting. Well, Bill, thank you so much, and congratulations. I think it's a great thing, but I know you're going to be super busy, right? Super busy.
Yeah.
And you get to go traveling the state, right? And what else happens when you're teacher of the year?
Yeah, I technically don't start really till 2022. So I know that we, all of the cohort, so there's I think 54 teachers of the year with the American Samoa and some of the Providences, we all get together and have like a cohort meeting where we kind of get into the program and talk about ways that we can really promote our message and our profession. And so that's kind of the first thing. I think that happens in February. And then from there, I'll be doing some different keynotes across the state. And I think next year at the Educators Conference, I'll be doing one of the keynote discussions or talks. So that's one of the things. We get the opportunity to go usually to Washington, D.C. and talk to the Secretary of Education. So really, I'm just excited to be an advocate for the profession and have that opportunity to go out and promote all the great things, like I said, that are happening in Montana. And I'm very honored. There's so many great teachers in Montana that, I definitely, we could have given it to lots of people. And so I feel very honored that I was chosen. But yeah, so it's going to be kind of a whirlwind, but I'm excited.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And we really couldn't have a better representative. You do us proud. Thank you so much. And I know you're going to take this year and get even more ideas, and and that will expand your vision, I'm sure, of what can and should be being done in classrooms and for kids, because that's the bottom line. That's why we're here. And so thank you for your work. Thank you for representing Montana, and good luck to you this next year. And I hope we can at least get together once in a while and see what you're doing, and help you any way we can too. So thank you so much, and I'll let you go on to your next meeting.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Good to talk to you, Bill.
Yeah, nice to talk to you.